Hey guys, welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of Nature's Wisdom. I am so excited that I got to film this and record this today because this is going to be all about herbalism and herbal energetics, herbal actions, and if you are wanting to really dive deep into herbalism and actually know how to use an herb, this is going to be an amazing episode for you to watch. And I'm just excited to explain this because this is truly my passion. Herbs are one of those things that I just could study all day. So here we go. Let's dive in and talk about the different parts of an herb, what they do, different things like that. And then I'm also going to highlight one of my favorite herbs for you today and kind of give you an example of how to pick out an action of an herb, like what it does in the body and how to pick out the herbal energetics. And I'm going to explain that in a minute, what that means. So before we jump right into that, I want to also give us a little foundation on whenever I talk about herbs and uses and what they can do for the body. One thing that we have to keep in mind is that herbalism is something that's going to gently support the body and gently support our body system. So if I talk about an herb that is good for the adrenal gland, supporting an adrenal gland issue, like an adaptogenic herb, right? That is going to gently support the adrenal glands in the HPA axis that we have. And we have to keep in mind that herbs are way different than pharmaceuticals or any pill that we could ever use for a condition. Because these pharmaceuticals, like they're working really fast. They're very potent. A lot of them have side effects. And I'm not saying anything bad about prescriptions here, but I just want to show the difference between a prescription type action, which is going to be very strong, very fast, and not always getting to the root cause, unfortunately. But with an herb, we're really just gently supporting the body to heal on its own. So that's a differentiating way that herbs work. Another thing that we have to consider is that we don't want to play doctor with herbs. So what I mean by that is if you are studying herbalism and you are listening to this video or the podcast and I talk about an herb and you're like, oh, this is what I want to use. Like this is going to be good for this issue that I have. You have to really remember that we don't just use an herb for a specific thing and just call it good. So what I mean by that is we really want to look at the whole person. And I'm going to talk about this in a little while too. We're going to look at the person's constitution. So meaning what herb that person may need. Maybe they need adrenal support, but that particular herb may not suit them the best. So we have to really look at this in an individualized approach to healing. That's what holistic medicine is all about, really, is looking at the person as a whole, what that person needs. So if one person has, stress or anxiety and the other person has that same issue, this one person may need a different herb than the other. So we're going to really get into that and knowing which herb to choose for yourself, for people around you, and just helping those in need. So that was just something that I wanted to talk about before we get started. And then let's get into herbal actions. So in herbal action, if you are picking out an herb and you're trying to learn about an herb, the first thing that you want to look at is what is that herbal action? So an action is going to give you a clue about which body systems this herb has an affinity for. So meaning that, like a nervine, for an example, that is an herbal action, and that has an affinity for the nervous system. So these actions, and there's many different actions and categorized herbs in the herbal world, but I'm going to talk about a couple of the common ones today and ones that you hear a lot about. But actions are a huge part of learning about herbalism. So, for example, if we're talking about echinacea, so that's a very common herb. We hear about it all the time for cold and flu, and this is classified as a lymphatic type herb, okay? And also something that I want you guys to realize is an herb may have many actions. Okay, so this is one way an herb is classified, and herbalists will a lot of times group all the lymphatic herbs together, all the nervine herbs together, things like that. But echinacea, for example, is also an antimicrobial, and it helps with bacteria and things like that. So one thing that we have to realize is that there are many different actions and nuances to herbs. So you may use, echinacea for your colds, but it's also supporting your lymphatic system. So there's not just one action to each herb. So anyways, echinacea, it's classified as a lymphatic herb, which is going to support your lymphatic system and the lymph movement, which is a detoxifying system in the body. And a property, that's another word that you'll hear a lot whenever you are learning about herbs. And a property, we'll get into that in a little bit, but it's just going to describe an herb further. But the property of echinacea is cool, bitter, and spicy. So that's getting a little bit into the energetics of the herb and the effect that it has on the body, which we'll get into a little bit later. So let's go over some common actions and things that I wanted to share with you guys today. So one that you will hear a lot about is a tonic herb. So this is to quote one of the amazing herbalist, James Green. He says, tonic herbs stimulate nutrition by improving the assimilation of essential nutrients by the organs and improve systemic tone. So it's lending increased vigor, energy, and the strength to the tissues of either a specific organ or to the whole body. So meaning a toning herb is going to just gently support that body system. So you have herbs that are going to just help to nutrify and tone the whole body. And then you have herbs that are going to tone a specific body system. So for example, you have red raspberry. That one of the actions is toning because it's toning for the reproductive system. So you'll have different herbs that are tonics and they're toning and supporting to a body system, but some are more general, such as like oatstraw. That's a more general toning or tonic herb because it helps the whole body. So examples of toning herbs, we already talked about oats, but hawthorn is another tonic herb or toning herb for the heart. Nettles is more of a general toning herb. Garlic, again, for the heart, and red raspberry for the reproductive system. Another herbal action that you will see in a lot of herbal books and things is an astringent herb. So this action causes tissues to tighten and to really help with loose tissues and sometimes even inflammation in the body. So a good example, what it would be is has a pulling and a drying action. And it's great for healing the skin. So if you had like a scrape or a cut or some type of wound, that astringent action would help to pull the tissues together for you to heal. Another good example of an astringent herb is that we may use that type of herb for someone who has leaky gut. So we know about gut permeability, where it has loose junctures in our small intestine where food proteins are slipping through into our bloodstream. But that astringent herb and that drying and that pooling action that it has will help to tighten up those loose junctures in the intestine. So it strengthens weakened tissues, just like we said. It also helps with like prolapsed organs and things like that. So it's toning and strengthening a tissue in the body. It's also great for bulging veins, such as hemorrhoids as well. One of the astringent herbs is horse chestnut, and that's a very common herb that people will use when they're trying to tighten and tone a prolapsed vein like a hemorrhoid. Herbals in this category are also white oak bark and witch hazel. So you can kind of see whenever you also think of witch hazel, which is very common, that is very tightening and toning. So you can feel that astringency of that herb. So another herbal action is going to be an adaptogen. And we already talked about this a little bit, but whenever you see that an herb is an adaptogen, if you're reading about an herb or you're studying it in a book, that means that it is going to help increase our body's resistance to stress or help with the endurance in the midst of stress. So these are going to help with a lot of adrenal exhaustion issues, HPA axis dysfunction, things like that. But it's going to really help to nourish our adrenal health and our adrenal glands. They also have a normalizing effect on the immune system. And personally, I believe that's because a lot of like stress, if we have elevated cortisol in the body, we're going to have our immune system downregulated because of that. So it does have a strengthening or normalizing effect for the immune system as well. Let's see, the herbs included are ashwagandha, we have Siberian ginseng, and eleuthera root. Those are all adaptogenic herbs. And just think of that whenever you hear the word adapt, it's like adapting to a situation, like it's helping the body with adapting to stress or a new job that you're starting or some kind of change in your life. It's really helping your body to cope in a way with extra stress added onto the body. Another herbal action that is very common are herbal bitters. So these class of herbs are going to help to stimulate your digestive enzymes, and they have an affinity for the liver and the pancreas. And that's just because, with the liver, we are, that's connected to the gallbladder. So we're also using that to help to stimulate fat digestion. It's also helping to stimulate the pancreas to secrete digestive enzymes. So bitter herbs are stimulating. They're also helping with our appetite as well. And they work as a good detox for the liver too. So it's all around like good for aiding digestion, helping with bloating, helping with just breaking down your fats, carbs, and your proteins. A lot of times you'll do bitters before a big meal to help to stimulate your digestive enzymes to break down the food you're about to eat. So bitter herbs are going to include gentian, dandelion, and artichoke. There are many others, but those are some common ones. And then another herbal action is a demulcent. So if you see a demulcent herb and you hear about that, that is going to be an herb that's going to help to soothe inflamed tissues and help to soothe like an inflamed digestive tract, like an IBS or Crohn's, or it's going to help with actually topical, like if you want to put that on your skin to help with dry inflamed tissues on your skin. Demulcent herbs, you can think of this as watering a dry garden. So it's like you're watering this soil that is maybe dry and inflamed. And it's really just helping to moisten that tissue and to soothe that tissue. It's also great too if you want to use it for scratchy throats, if you have a cold, anything that a demulcent herb that is hitting physically. So if it's going through your digestive tract, it's going to soothe all of those tissues that it hits. So, like I said, you want to have contact with a demulcent herb. So, it's going to really work on those things that are directly in its path. So in herbs that are demulcents in this category are marshmallow, slippery elm, mullein, and corn silk. And then vulneraries, that is the other class or action that I want to talk about in herbs. And vulnerary herbs are typically used to help with the skin and helping with healing like bruises, cuts, wounds, things like that. So just think about topical applications when it comes to vulnerary herbs. So that's comfrey, calendula, St. John's wort, and marshmallow. And also too, I want to note that even though these are considered vulnerary herbs like St. John's wort, these aren't just for topical use. You can use this internally as well because like St. John's wort, we know this is all good for depression and helping with our mood and things like that. So vulnerary herbs are just one aspect of that herb is that you can use it on your skin. There's many other uses as well. So going forward, we have, instead of just talking about the action of the herb and what it does for the body, we can talk about the different properties of an herb. Okay, so this is more describing an herb and what it's doing for the body. So this can refer to energetics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It can talk about different constituents, like actually scientific constituents that make up a plant, and it tells us why that plant works the way it does, like tannins or saponins is another one too. So those are different constituents, or it may just describe how it works on the body. So properties is kind of more a general term, but it can relate to a lot of those different things. One thing that I want to mention is that actions and properties, sometimes they use the same word. So for example, a bitter herb that we just talked about, that class of herbs that are all considered bitter herbs, that can also be describing just how an herb tastes too. So the energetics of an herb. So sometimes that can be a little bit confusing, but once you actually learn the actions of an herb, there's like so many other ones, but I just picked out, 5 or so to talk about. You're going to get that a lot better. But the properties of an herb, let's talk about a couple of different things when it comes to properties. The one thing I want to talk about too is there are different things to describe the herb, but one thing that we can use to help you if you're trying to figure out which herb that you want to use on the body is something called the Herbal Safety Continuum Scale. So what that is it is a scale that herbalists use, and it will categorize an herb from 1 to 5 and how safe or how gentle or potent an herb is. So the herbs like in the class 1, it's going to be like really gentle, really safe herbs like alfalfa, there's dandelion, nettle, things like that. And then you go up from there to more nourishing tonics and stimulating tonics. And then class 4 are more acute use herbs. So that's going to talk about black walnut, maybe Cascara sagrada, herbs that are more used for specific purposes and not for like long periods of time. They're just used to help to cleanse the body or specific purposes like that. And then you also have class 5, which are considered low dose herbs. So you're just using a very small amount of them. Arnica is one, and then foxglove and poke root. Those are some examples of a class 5 herb in the continuum scale. So that's something that you guys can just look up and use for yourself and figure out, what is my herb that I'm trying to use? Like, how safe is it? Is it going to be very stimulating? Is it going to be a little more gentle? Again, that is the herbal continuum scale. All right, so moving on to another property or an aspect of an herb in a way that we can describe it or categorize it is herbal energetics. So energetics can describe an individual like me and you. It can describe a diagnosis or a health condition, or it can describe an herb. So we learn a lot about an herb and in the energetics that it holds by the taste. So actually, years and years ago, before we even had textbooks about herbs, herbalists who are, foraging in the woods, they're just going to taste herbs and see how it tastes on their palate. Like, was it bitter? Was it more astringent? Was it really sweet or mild? And that's how they actually got to classify an herb and describe an herb before we actually had all of the actions and all of these other things years later. So the taste and the flavor can really tell us a lot about that herb and what it can do for the body. So, like I said, the herb has taste and flavors. The individual, they can have a herbal energetic component. We'll get into that a little bit later. And also a condition can have energetics to describe that condition. So for example, if we are going to talk about these different energetics, we have to also talk about too where they kind of come from. So traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, which is more Indian medicine, they use taste and flavors to describe an herb. So that's where we're getting a lot of these flavors. And I want to go over, there's about 6 different flavors that normally you will see in herbal textbooks. And I want to help to describe what those are and what herbs are considered bitter herbs or sour herbs, things like that, to give you more of a better idea. Another thing too that you'll notice that I'll mention whenever I talk about these flavors is elements. So in traditional Chinese medicine, there are, I believe, 5 elements. Yes, so there's earth, fire, wood, water, and metal. So these actually go along with flavors. And what the Chinese medicine practitioners believe is that everything on earth is made up of a combination of these elements. So one person or one object may have more of the earth element or more of the wood element. And earth and wood and all of these elements, they have different characteristics. So I'm going to talk about those whenever I talk about the flavors as well. So you'll hear me mention that. And one thing too, just so you understand as well, kind of a little bit more about the elements. If somebody has an imbalance in one of these elements, because the Chinese believe that we need to have a balance in these elements to have good health. So if somebody has an imbalance of the earth element, for example, so typically they describe the earth element as cold, wet, and heavy. So that's associated with excess dampness in the body as well if you have too much of this earth element. And whenever you think of dampness in the body and in condition wise, you have to think about things like gut infections, like swampy or damp, gut, a lack of circulation. So this person may need more of the fire element, which is another element in traditional Chinese medicine, which helps to clear a lot of those damp and stagnant earth elements. So the fire element, you may need more like bitter or pungent herbs to help to dry up that dampness. So that's just a little bit of a background for you to understand whenever I talk about all of these tastes and flavors, as well as the elements that are associated with those flavors. So let's get into the sour flavor here. We're going to talk about the sour flavor, and how it's described is it's hot, wet, and light. So whenever I say those different elements there, that is going to describe what it's going to do on the body. So the hot element is going to be more stimulating, and then the wet is also going to help with a dry constitution, and light obviously is going to be better for somebody who has a imbalance in maybe the earth element, which is very heavy. So sour herbs are going to help to balance out the opposite of some of those elements. Organs associated with this flavor are the liver and the gallbladder. So herbs that are sour in taste are going to be naturally supportive to those organs. The TCM element that we just talked about is wood, and they are moistening to our tissues because they increase saliva. Think about when you have like lemon water that's very sour. It's going to make you start to salivate, and it's going to help with increasing secretions like saliva. It's also astringent in a lot of ways. They're anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. One thing about the sour element in an herb, if you have somebody who is maybe a little bit dry in their constitution, they don't need too much of a sour element, because if you drink like too much lemon water, you'll actually begin to notice that it's going to be more drying after a long while. So you need balance in these flavors. The sour element can help with a lack of motivation, a lack of focus, and it can be a digestive aid. And again, herbs like that are lemon, things like that. So and then we are getting into the astringent flavor. And it's also similar to sour, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but again, it's tightening. You'll get a puckering feeling in your mouth whenever you have tasted an astringent herb, so that's going to be a clue, like this must have an astringent effect on the body, which is tightening and helping to tone loose tissues. Helps to heal wounds topically as well. Herbs, actually black tea can be very astringent, witch hazel, and then the white oak bark powder. Another taste, and we already talked about this, but bitter is a taste and a flavor as well as an herbal action. But bitter, the flavor is going to be cooling, dry, and light on the body. The TCM element is fire. So think about bitters helping to stimulate your digestive juices, that fire that we have in our stomach, the acid that we have in our stomach, that is that fire element. And the organs associated with a bitter herb that it would help the heart as well as the liver and small intestines. They can be anti-inflammatory, helps with excess heat infections. So you'll see a lot of bitter herbs for gut infections where dampness is really rampant, like we were talking about. Somebody who has a lot of damp conditions may benefit from more of those fire type element herbs like bitter herbs. So it helps with excess heat and inflammation. It stimulates digestion like we talked about. Bitter herbs, it's also really neat because they help us with digestion, but they have this downward energy, meaning that whenever you take a bitter herb with your food, it helps to continue to have that food go down into your small intestine and then the large intestine. So it's like moving your food through your stomach where it needs to go and going downward. So herbs that are in this category are artichoke, gentian, and dandelion. And then we have the sweet flavor. And this is not going to be sweet like we think of like sweets and things. But it's going to be more mild, I would say, in flavor when you taste an herb that is more sweet. It's just going to be kind of more bland. But the elements associated with the sweet flavor is wet, cold, and heavy. So sweet things and herbs as well as sweet foods, they are building and very nutritive to the body. So a lot of sweet herbs, they may be full of minerals and be very building and supportive. The organs associated with these type of herbs, it helps the spleen and the stomach. And then the TCM element is earth. So like we said, it's very just grounding, calming, building herbs. A food that would describe like sweet would be something like oatmeal, things that are very calming and grounding. So again, they're building and very nutritive, a lot of minerals in these herbs. They help to lubricate the body and moisten the body. They are calming, centering for our nervous system. And again, they can be more bland and more earthy tasting. Herbs that are sweet are astragalus root and licorice root. Salt or salty is the next flavor that I want to talk about. And this has elements of being heavy, hot, and wet on the body. The element is water and TCM. The organs that are associated with this flavor are the kidneys and the adrenals. So these herbs that are considered to be salty in nature are going to directly benefit our adrenals and our kidneys. They are very grounding, they're warming, soothing. Again, they help with adrenal function. They're very restorative to the nervous system. And they also help to strengthen our bones and our teeth because, again, they're also mineral-rich herbs mostly. And they're great for hair, skin, and nails. So some examples would be nettle, chickweed, and oatstraw. Pungent is the next flavor that I want to talk about. Elements to the pungent flavor, and it's just like it sounds, it's going to be very strong whenever you taste that herb. It's going to be hot, dry, light, spicy, and it's very sharp to the taste whenever you taste this herb. The TCM element is metal. And the organs associated with this element are the lungs and the large intestine. So these herbs are going to help to promote circulation. It's going to help to bring blood flow to the extremities, and it helps with stagnant inflammation or congestion in the body. So herbs that are pungent are cayenne, oregano, and rosemary. And then one that you will also see that is very similar to sweet is bland. You may see that in some herbal books, but that flavor is, again, more sweet and bland, but it's demulcent herbs are a lot of this kind of bland flavor. Barks and roots are considered bland as well. So let's get into constitutions as well, because we talked about herbal energetics and how that can be related to herbs, and we talked about all of the flavors of herbs, but we can actually have energetics applied to ourselves. So we already talked about this a little bit, but in Ayurveda, that is Indian medicine, they believe that we have a constitution that we are born with, and it can be affected or changed slightly to help us to balance ourselves out, but it mostly stays the same. So there are 3 different constitutional types. Pitta, which is leaning on the side of more heat, fire, redness. They have great circulation usually, and they tend towards having more inflammation in the body. So somebody who has a Pitta constitution is going to probably deal with more like rashes or inflammation. Maybe they're always hot. They're always asking for the air conditioning to be on, things like that. And they always have like warm hands, warm feet. They have great circulation. That's going to be more of a Pitta constitution. Kapha is another one, and that is cool, damp. Water is another way to describe that. And this constitution, it needs a lot more stimulating. So again, that is kind of more of that earth element in Chinese medicine, where they're maybe a little more sluggish. Maybe they have more dampness in the body, more gut issues, things like that. And they need more of those stimulating, bitter or pungent herbs to help with congestion in the body. Vata is the other constitution, and that is described by being very dry. They usually need a lot of more nourishing herbs, and it's also associated with the element of air. So, nourishing and moisturizing herbs are really good for the Vata constitution. So these are things you can also think about whenever you are picking out an herb for yourself or somebody that you know, and you're trying to decide which one to use. Is this lining up with their constitution? So for example, if somebody had a very Pitta constitution, which is that heat, that fire, that redness, and they have a lot of inflammation, maybe they're dealing with heartburn, things like that, you would want to use a cooling and a soothing herb, such as maybe slippery elm or marshmallow, things like that, to help with that overabundance of fire. So you see how we're like really complementing the body when we're picking out an herb. And this again has to do with the actions of the herb and the properties, such as the energetics, like the taste and the flavors and what that brings along with the herb. One other thing I want to point out about herbs, whenever you are maybe foraging for herbs, or you see like a beautiful picture of an herb in an herb book, is the doctrine of signatures. So what that means is it's a really fun way for us to get a clue at what that herb may do for the body by how it looks. So what I mean by that is, let's take an example of passion flower, okay? If you've ever seen a picture of passion flower, just go look it up on the internet. It's really beautiful. And the face of the flower, it looks a lot like the face of a clock. And what they've noticed is it's a very calming herb, but it helps even with people who maybe feel constrained by time. They feel like they're racing the clock, things like that. So passion flower has some clues to show us what it's good for just by looking at it. You know, how amazing is that? You'll also notice with passion flower, there are these little tendrils that come up from around the flower, and they're kind of looping and they look a little frazzled and crazy going around the flower. And that a lot of times is associated with helping with calming, looping, and just these thoughts that will not go away if you feel stuck with you can't shut your mind off, things like that. Passion flower is great for that. They also look a little frazzled too when you look at those little tendrils. So it's great for that frazzled person who just can't shut their mind off and they just need some calm and they really need to rest. Another good example is dandelion. And again, it has these beautiful yellow flowers, and the color yellow a lot of times is associated with the liver. So we already know that dandelion is a bitter herb and it helps with liver and gallbladder function. And that yellow color just gives us a clue into that. And one way we can look at it is you'll notice when somebody has jaundice, they have a yellow tint to their skin, and that is usually a liver issue where their liver needs support. And that yellow color just gives us that clue. It's like, okay, that is liver, and that's something that's going to help my liver. Another thing too is St. John's wort. They have beautiful yellow flowers on this plant. And this doctrine of signatures really goes to show, because of St. John's wort ability to help with depression and bringing sunshine in your life, that little yellow flower really resembles sunshine. And it's just really beautiful. And that is one way that we can say, this is going to help with bringing a little bit more happiness and calmness in my life. So I would encourage you too, if you ever have the opportunity to go foraging, or you have herbs that actually grow on your property, or you just go walking in the woods, use your intuition and take a look at an herb and say, what is this herb trying to show me right now? What picture do I come up with whenever it comes to an herb? And it doesn't have to be anything that I talked about. Like, you can come up with your own doctrine of signatures that reminds you why this herb is good for this particular thing. So that's a really fun way to categorize herbs and think about herbals. And now that we have gotten through a lot of the herbal energetics and the actions and things, I want to talk about a specific herb that I love, and it's one of my favorite herbs. I've been using it a lot lately, and I want to give you guys an example of all the things that I've talked about and using that with a particular herb here. So this herb I want to talk about is oats. And the Latin name is Avena Sativa. It's kind of a fun way talking about your oatmeal in the morning, but Avena Sativa is the Latin name for oats. And this is the most amazing medicine. There are different ways you can use this, and I'm going to talk about the 3 different types of medicine that we get from this plant. So number 1 is the oatstraw. Those are the stalks of the plant. And then we also have this fresh milky oats, or the oat seed. And you'll see that on the top of the stalks. And you want to get this medicine whenever they are fresh and young and they have not dried out yet. So it's called fresh milky oats too, because if you squeeze that, the top, they'll have like a little milky liquid come out of that. And then also you have the matured oat seed whenever it has dried out. And that's where we get our oatmeal, where we can roll that or cut it and make oatmeal. So actions of this herb, it is a nutritive tonic. It's a neurorestorative, antidepressant, demulcent. It is mildly stimulating, and it's a vulnerary. So, like I said, there are many different actions. I only talked about a couple of them today, but the nutritive tonic, we talked about that. That's going to support the overall body and nourishing the overall body. The neurorestorative is going to help with the brain function. It's going to help with your nervous system and actually rebuilding your nervous system. Antidepressant, that's pretty self-explanatory. The demulcent, again, was very soothing. It's soothing for any tissue that is inflamed and needs healing. And again, it's mildly stimulating, maybe give you like a tiny bit of energy. And the vulnerary is, again, healing for the skin and wounds, bruises, things like that. So oats energetics are warm, moist, and sweet. And again, just to reiterate, whenever we hear that, warm is going to help with maybe somebody who has a constitution of, being very cold, or they just need better circulation. They just need a little bit more warming. Moist, again, is going to help with those dry, inflamed tissues. And sweet is really just showing us that this herb is going to be building and it's going to be very nutritive. The organ systems that are associated with oats are the nervous system, the circulation or the heart, the reproductive system, and the skin. So oats in general, there's 3 different, ways we can use this plant, but in general, it is the perfect medicine for a frazzled, stressed out individual who is having 50 things to do and they just can't keep up with the rat race of life. It can literally rebuild and restore the nervous system. And that's incredible because a lot of times if you have a frazzled nervous system, you're going to be reacting to things. You're going to be like hyper vigilant. You're going to be jumping whenever you hear a little sound. It's going to be very building for the nervous system. It helps us to slow down and just really relax. And again, it's the perfect herb whenever you're frazzled. You may snap a little bit easily and little things bother you more than normal. This is the perfect remedy for that. And again, the perfect adrenal food as well. There's so many minerals in oats that it helps to nourish our adrenal function and then in turn help with our stress hormones. So let's talk about a little bit of the different parts of this and why you would use one part over the other. So the first part I'll talk about is oatstraw, and these are the stalks. So I have an oatstraw infusion right here. And you can see, sometimes people call it oat grass. If you're looking at the video here, this is the oatstraw infusion. And this, basically, I'll tell you how to make an infusion in a little while, but this is going to extract all of those properties out of this oat straw, and it really helps to pull out the minerals in this plant. So oat straw is going to be great for that person who's extremely stressed, but maybe just has, not extremely stressed, but somebody who is slightly stressed, but has like a little bit of fatigue. So maybe they have some PMS symptoms or just need a little bit of a boost of energy. It's really good for just feeling depleted because it's full of magnesium. It's an amazing source of magnesium, silica, selenium, chromium, beta carotene, iron, B vitamins, vitamin C. And again, it builds back the nervous system through its mineral content. Again, it's a great source of magnesium, so it's going to help with muscle tension, menstrual cramps, things like that, headaches. It's good for the brain, for attention and focus because of all the minerals. It's good for hair, skin, and nails. And that demulcent effect of oats is really going to help with your gut lining and soothing and healing any inflammation there. Because of the mineral content, it's great for your bones and teeth. It works as a gentle lymph mover as well. And you can actually use this oat straw infusion topically to help as that vulnerary aspect to our skin to really help with any wounds or bruises, any inflammation on the skin. So not only can you drink this, but you can actually use it on your skin. Now, how I made this, I'll just talk about this for just a little bit. This oat straw infusion, this is the best way to get the medicine out of oat straw specifically. So what I did is I took my mason jar, filled it about halfway with the oat straw, and then I took hot water and I topped it all off and filled it up to the top. So what you want to do with this is not going to be just your average tea. You want to do this as an overnight or a long infusion, because in order to get these minerals out of this plant, we really need a lot of heat and time to extract these. So I'm going to have this sit either overnight or all day, and then the next day I will strain out this herb and then put it back in my jar and then sip that throughout the day to help with minerals. So you can do a tincture with this as well, but an oat straw infusion just with water works great. Okay, so let's move on to the fresh milky oat seed. Is, like I said, the part of the oat plant that is harvested in the summer. It's those green seeds, if you want to call it, that have that milky substance that is in the middle there. But you want to harvest these whenever they are fresh. You don't want them dried out. So that's why you call it fresh milky oat seed. These are more so going to be for somebody who is really, really depleted and on the verge of burnout. So as opposed to the oat straw, which is still good in building for those who are stressed because of the mineral content, the fresh milky oat seed is going to be like a deeper medicine for those who really need some adrenal support. They really, maybe they're just so depressed that they're so stressed that they're depressed and they can't get out of that place. They're just burnt out. So that fresh milky oat seed is going to be really, really great for somebody who is gotten to that place. So it works, like I said, a lot deeper to restore the nervous system and the adrenals than the oat straw. It might be good for somebody who has gone through some trauma. Maybe they lost a loved one or going through like a chronic sickness. That milky oat seed is going to be really, really restorative. It's similar to getting a hug from a friend, like when you're really, really down. Milky oat seed is like that herbal hug for that person. It's really good for people who are sensitive to stimulants and maybe they can't do like adaptogens like ginseng, which is a little too overpowering for them and too stimulating. And they just need something more calming and uplifting. That milky oat seed is really, really good for that. It's nourishing to the kidneys. It helps to build the kidney yin, it's called in traditional Chinese medicine. And that is just our overall vitality and our energy and our health. And again, this is for the person who is probably so depressed that she's just done and burnt out, anxious, stressed, mentally and physically exhausted. It's good for that person who jumps whenever the door slams and it's like you're jumping more than normal and you're just on edge. Anxiety before your period helps with vaginal dryness, sexual exhaustion, loss of libido, dry hair, skin, nails. It helps with headaches from overwork and overthinking, tremors and spasms. It helps with anything from like nervous exhaustion, like eye twitching, things like that, where you're just so depleted. Now, the milky oat seed is best whenever tinctured. You can also do an overnight infusion, but you'll mostly see it tinctured because of that seed aspect and that alcohol really helping to extract that seed instead of a water infusion. And then again, you can also use oats as oatmeal and really have a very nourishing and nutritive food. And it's really helping to build somebody, especially if somebody needs, going back to the Ayurvedic constitutions and needs more kapha in their life. That's going to really help with calming, grounding, and nourishment. But then on the other hand too, if you're doing like too much of that building, calming, you might need some like cinnamon or some kind of warming spice in there to help balance out that sweet, kind of more heavy oatmeal flavor for somebody. So those are the 3 different parts of oat straw, the milky oat seed, and then again, the food oatmeal that you can use. Use it in your daily life. Make an oatstraw infusion, make a tincture from the milky oat seed, and just watch how it really will build your nervous system and really help with depletion and stress. And I would just love to hear your feedback too whenever you try some of these things and it's really helping you. Let me know, even send me a message on Instagram and let me know how you're liking it. But that really concludes everything that I wanted to talk about today. I hope that you learned a lot. I hope that it was really informative and a really good foundation for herbal energetics, herbal actions, and kind of getting you started to be a mini herbalist and really helping with understanding herbs and herbal energetics and things like that. And I would love if you would just give me a review for this podcast if you did enjoy this episode. And I hope to do more episodes like this in the future, more herbal focused episodes as well. So stay tuned for more fun episodes, and I will talk to you guys again soon. Thanks.